You are listening to WTUZ Radio Podcast. Welcome to WTUZ Radio Podcast. I am your host, Rhonda. And today's topic, we are going to discuss the history of marijuana and how it is being applied today. So the title of this is I'm in Love with Mary Jane. Okay, so what sparked me to do this particular podcast, of course, is the fact that many states in the United States and across other nations are now starting to legalize marijuana. Okay, now let's stick with particularly the United States on how marijuana was a Schedule 1 narcotic, and a lot of people were locked up and jailed for its use and for its distribution. And particularly the numbers as far as incarceration rates were extremely high for people of color. Okay, so now we're at the point where many states are legalizing marijuana, and it fits into two categories. One is for medical use only, and the other one is total legalization, or they're calling it recreational legalization. Now, those particular two categories are different by state. They vary by state. And I also have to add that some still have it listed as Schedule 1, where it is not legal at all under any circumstances. Now, California was the first to lead the way in a step of legalizing marijuana because it was done at the state level, and then it still wasn't legal at the federal level. Although I still think that's the case, that it's still, quote, quote, not legal at the federal level, but at the state level, they have their own set of rules and laws, and it's fine. So California was the first to blaze, no pun intended, the first step in recreational legalization. They started with a medical marijuana card, and then it led to recreational use, and it started spreading across the U.S. I can't remember who was next, if not Utah, but Oregon, Portland, Oregon, I think was next. I'm not sure if Vegas was next. So a couple of the states out west, and then it started coming east. So particularly, we're talking a big one was Illinois is now recreational use, and a couple other states. I'm not going to go through all of the states. Now, Illinois, which if you are familiar with that state, they have huge budget deficits. They have one of the highest property taxes in the nation, specifically the city of Chicago. It is, when I tell you it's beyond ridiculous, it's beyond ridiculous. Well, when they legalized the recreational use of marijuana, they instantaneously started making big money. We're talking profits in the billions in the first month that they legalized marijuana for recreational use. Hence is the reason that a lot of other states, of course, are doing it as well. So in other words, they're taking the criminalization out of the use of the plant, okay, or whether or not you want to call it a substance. Some people still call it a drug, all right? So what we're going to do, we are going to get into a little bit of the history of marijuana and or cannabis. That's also, I guess that's the plant definition name of it, which is cannabis. We're going to get into a little bit of the history so you can see how marijuana or cannabis being a substance abuse was not always the case across the world. Okay, so bear with me. Oh, before I get into that, when we get back into the states uh, giving authorization for either medical use or recreational use, the sale of it and the distribution of it is still a licensing process for those particular states. So, meaning you have to go to a dispensary to get your cannabis. And in some cases, you are allowed, depending on the state, one or two plants where you can grow for your own personal use. Okay, so all right, let's get into the history of marijuana or cannabis. So now, y'all, you all know I just had to go to Marijuana Times because I figured they would have a great write-up. Although Wikipedia has a great write-up as well, I wanted to do Marijuana Times. Okay, so this is a history of cannabis and prohibition. When it comes to history, there are a lot of things that get left out of textbooks for various reasons. And even through multiple world history and American history classes, I can't recall a single bit of information about cannabis prior to the Reefer Madness era. All right, so those of you not familiar, and this is really before my time, y'all. I want to say this was back either in the 50s or 40s. And you can go look this up probably on YouTube. They have the video. Look it up, called Reefer Madness. If there was ever a poster board for propaganda, that film was definitely that. All right. Perhaps there was a quick mention of things made of hemp, but no real background on the plant. How its uses were discovered, or how it made it way pretty much all across the world. All right, so it was for this reason that I decided to write this article and a few that will follow it. Cannabis is an amazing plant that we're learning more and more about every year, but perhaps we could better understand this plant if we look past the last century of back and forth prohibition and started with the thousands of years when it was just another plant. A quick note, I've linked you to many sources throughout this article. However, some of the information I will be providing you with here came from a book recommended to me specifically for this piece. It was an excellent read. I would like to recommend it to you. Smoke Signals by Martin A. Lee. The oldest record of cannabis use dates back 10,000 years. The use of hemp and marijuana dates back to the Neolithic period, which makes cannabis one of the first agricultural crops to ever be cultivated and harvested. Now that's deep. Back to the Neolithic period, it was one of the first agricultural crops. The people of this time managed to find uses for every part of the cannabis plant, from the stems and the stalks that provided fiber for cloth, rope, cords, and more. The roots, leaves, and flowers, which were used both in medicine and spiritual rituals, and finally the seeds, which they ate as a way to provide essential fatty acids and proteins. A cord used in a piece of pottery found in an ancient village located near what is modern Taiwan is the oldest piece of hemp found to date. Being one of the first agricultural crops, it is quite possible that the use of hemp helped to shape civilization as we know it today. Richard Hamilton in 2009 Scientific American article on sustainable agriculture, modern humans emerged some 250,000 years ago, yet agricultural is a fairly recent invention, only about 10,000 years ago. Agriculture is not natural. It is a human invention. It is also the basis of modern civilization. Okay, so that's just once again, I know I talked about recently in a quick update on the Texas ice storm on how, as a society, we have become very dependent on the food system. All right, so you can see where it clearly points out that agriculture is not natural, it's a human invention based, and it's the basis of modern civilization. All right, so the origins of the plant are speculated to be in the foothills of the Himalayas, and it started its migration around the world with a group of people known as the Scythians. A passage from Herodotus, forgive me, I know I'm butchering this, histories from 440 BC mentions Scythians howling with pleasure with hemp vapor trail. This was when the plant split off into two different directions, and hemp found its way headed towards Europe, where it was used as a fiber crop for a multitude of early industrial material, and the psychoactive twin moved towards India, the Middle East, and Africa, where it flourished as medicinal herb and was used for its psychoactive purposes in many spiritual rituals. Okay, so I'm going to beg to differ that was in the Himalayas was its first use, because we also know that the indigenous people of Americas also use the plant heavily as well. Okay, so I'm hoping that this article will get into it, because I do know for a fact, if you go back and look at some of the early American charters from England over to the U.S., hemp was also a part of hemp and cannabis was a part of the crops that had to be sent back to Europe. Okay, so that means the Americans, the indigenous Americans, were growing hemp, and that had to be sent back to Europe as a part of an agricultural crop. All right, so anybody that is familiar with cannabis know that it's a relatively easy crop to grow. It grows fast. So if they were using it all that long in Europe, why would they need to bundle it up in colonial times? So I'll even say, let's say the earliest, the 1600s, although England really didn't get involved until the 1700s, but we'll be fair, let's say the 1600s. Why would they have to send it back to Europe? Okay, so I question that. All right, so the emergence of cannabis in Asian cultures, it was in 2737 BC that marijuana was first recorded for its particular medicinal usage. Pen Sai Ching, which is a pharmacopoeia of a pharmacy, I'm just going to say pharmacy, of Emperor Xingnang. The emperor is considered to be the father of traditional Chinese medicine, and he recommended the use of marijuana, or ma, as it was referred to, for over 100 different ailments, including female weakness, gout, rheumatism, malaria, constipation, and even absent-minded. Oh, wow. So, okay, just real quick. Let's go on over this because first of all, notice how marijuana, ma, the Chinese called it ma. So now, just a little quick tidbit with the actual cannabis plant when you're using it for strength and medicinal purposes. The strongest plant is the female plant. And the reason is because she has the bud per se. Okay? So if you have a male plant next to the female plant, he would, fertilize the female plant, and that would cause her to put her energy more into nurturing her babies or her baby plants rather than nurturing her flower or the bud. That's why when folks are growing cannabis for medicinal purposes to get the strength, they do not have the male cannabis plant in the same space as the female plant or ma, because it weakens her strength. All right. Now, this is the interesting part about this. I kind of cracked up when I found this out. When you can identify the male plant, because literally, I'm not making this up. Go look at it. Look it up for yourself. The male plant, you can see little balls hanging from him. That's how you can identify the male from the female cannabis plant. So any grower, again, that is growing cannabis for the strength of the bud is the flower. They always remove the male, okay? And the male can be grown separate locations. So you don't want the male where even if the wind blows, he can pollinate the female plant. But the male can be used for, let's say, manufacturing purposes. So for the hemp part, the stem, and all of that jazz, making fabrics and etc. etc. All right. But the other part of this, I did not know this about gout, that the Asian or Chinese medicine use cannabis for gout. Female weakness, I'm assuming that's menstrual cramps. Rheumatism, malaria, did not know that either. Constipation. Now, absent-mindedness kind of cracks me up because another stigma of cannabis is it is said that it makes you lose your short-term memory. So I find that interesting that the Chinese was using it for absent-mindedness. Interesting. All right, so Ma was considered by Shen Nung to be one of the supreme elixirs of immortality, which according to him, if taken over a long period of time, could allow one to communicate with spirits, and when one would find their body becomes lighter. So yeah, he was lit up, baby. However, he also said that when consumed in excess, it could make people see demons. All right. So now, from a spiritual perspective, cannabis is known as a particular herb that can help the one that's taking it open up specific gateways from the spiritual perspective. All right. And that's why I always tell people that if you are using cannabis specifically through meditation and you're, going into the spiritual realm, be careful because you still need to have control of your consciousness. All right. So I can see some people that if you're just so blitz out of your mind or high as a kite, as they say. I could see people having bad experiences with cannabis. Okay, and that goes the same with shrooms also. So I would strongly suggest people that are trying to be consciously aware, access these spiritual gateways, to try to do it yourself naturally. Or if you do want to use cannabis, only use it in a small amount. Don't get to the point where you are like high. All right. And because it can get really, really scary very, very easily. I can see that. All right. So, but that lets you know that Shin, he was getting blazed out. But anyway, over in India, cannabis consumption found its way into Hindu worship and Ayurvedic medical practices. Sorry, I know I'm not pronouncing that right. Ancient Vedic texts read that the psychoactive cannabis plant was a gift from the god Shiva, and that where the nectar of immortality landed on the earth, ganja grew. Ganja. Now that's interesting once again, that here you have, although Asia and India, or China and India, they're still both in Asia, but even the India culture, they're also calling it immortality. That's the same thing the Chinese said as well. There were 3 common forms that one might find cannabis in India. Back in these days, the first is called bhang, which is a liquid drink blended from the leaves and stems of uncultivated plants. Its potency is actually comparable to marijuana that is available in the present day United States. Yep. So a lot of times, family, when you're seeing these different products on the cannabis market today, some of them are made from the leaves, etc., etc. Okay, because really the entire plant on down to the stems, it's usable. It's definitely usable. All right. The second was called ganja. And I swear, y'all, I could have sworn ganja came from the Jamaicans. I ain't even finna sit up here and lie. I could have sworn ganja came from the Jamaicans, rather. The second was called ganja. Now you know where that term came from. Yes, thank you, Sweet Pea, because I swear I thought it was the Jamaicans, honey. Which is actually more potent than bhang, and made from the tops of the cultivated plant, the buds that we are used to consuming today. Okay, so they just told y'all that the stems and the stems and the leaf of the plant, they're not as powerful as that bud. All right. Now, those of you in the melanated community, y'all already know what bud means. So any other nationalities, now y'all know what bud means. That represents the actual flower of the plant. All right. And remember, the strongest potency of that bud is going to be from a mother plant that has not been fertilized. So in other words, you see how pregnancy and having children wear a woman down, because she got to put all her strength in the pregnancy and in those babies. So anyway, the third form and most potent way that marijuana was prepared back then was called charas. And it was very similar to hashi and made from scraping the resin off the leaves of the cultivated plant. Okay, wow, never knew that. I done learned something new. Traveling from Asia to the Middle East. Brought to the Middle East between 2000 to 1400 BC, likely by the nomadic Scythians, cannabis quickly found its way in both the Muslim and European cultures, just as it found its way into the lives of those in Asia. In Egypt, the use of marijuana as a medicinal plant has been depicted as far back as 2000 BC, the first time being in Kemet as a way to treat sore eyes and cataracts. Oh, wow. And even to this day, it is said that marijuana is or cannabis is great for your eyesight and cataracts. Surprisingly, originally found on the mummies of Ramesses II, cannabis pollen was found to be on all known royal mummies. In the Middle East, cannabis was most often used as an intoxicant, the main reason for this being that alcohol was not allowed to be consumed by those who followed Muhammad. However, cannabis was accepted and also often used as a substitute. Oh, that's interesting. The medicinal use of the plant was first recorded in this region in 700 BC in the Vendidad, which is believed to be written by Zoroaster. When the Scythians left the Middle East, they once again brought the cannabis plant with them, this time finding its way to Russia and Ukraine. From the Middle East, the plant then finds its way to the rest of the African territory, mostly in the form of seeds, by being traded between countries. Okay, so it's saying from the Middle East to Africa, cannabis arrived in Africa around Ethiopian times in the 14th century, and once planted and being carefully cultivated, they soon found the plant thriving. It did not take long for cannabis to become one of the most important crops in the region. It was not long before the plant was being integrated into their culture, which started off with African tribesmen chewing cannabis leaves. Okay, so there you see another way to consume it. However, they soon learned the art of smoking the herb, and that changed the course of the African culture in a number of ways. People learned skills such as making pipes, and the consumption of smoked cannabis quickly found itself as a large part of both ritualistic gathering and for recreational purposes during social gatherings. Actually, there is a tribe whose entire religion is based on cannabis, and they are called the Bashalinj. They call themselves Bini Rambia, which translates to the sons of hemp. The ancient culture saw cannabis as a god and saw the pipes used for smoking as a symbol of peace, the first peace pipes. And they believed the plant held magical powers and used it to ward off evil spirits. Right, so there goes yet another culture looking at the plant from the spiritual perspective. Though it is less spoken of in African cultures, cannabis was used still for medicinal purposes, mostly to treat common conditions as dysentery, diarrhea, rheumatism, and malaria. While I did not know, y'all, that cannabis was used for malaria, which malaria is, that's a problem in Africa and some of the Asian islands as well. So this is really interesting. It was also applied as a salve for snake bites, and it was also used to facilitate childbirth and as a treatment for asthma. You better get on out of here. Did not know that also. I can see the childbirth because it is can be used for pain management as well. But you know what? I can see it for asthma because I know someone whose daughter is taking it. She has a special needs daughter, and she has seizures, and her daughter has a cannabis card to treat those seizures, and she said it was like night and day. I think she gives it to her in a liquid form. Yeah, it's in liquid form. And she said it like literally, she went from having several seizures a day down to maybe once a month. And all they have to do is give her the liquid cannabis when she's having a seizure and she's fine. So that makes sense that it would be treated for asthma. All right. From the Middle East on to Europe. When the Scythians first left the Himalayan foothills with cannabis in hand, they went to two directions, towards the west to Europe and further east into Asia. While the plants that found themselves in Asia flourished with the psychoactive THC and were used, in most cases, for medicinal and spiritual purposes. The cannabis that made its way to colder northern European climate ended up becoming what we know now as industrial hemp. That's what I was trying to get y'all when I was talking about the male plants earlier. They used the male plant for industrial hemp. Over the years, hemp was cultivated extensively for the use of its fiber to make everything from. To listen to this episode in its entirety, go to anchor.fm/WTUZ radio. Again, that's anchor.fm/WTUZ radio. And the link is in the description. Thank you, and peace and love.